Okay, welcome to our Tuesday night Torah study. I was gone last week. I understand John did a pretty good thing, and talked about what was it? It was that guy, Moses' brother-in-law. I think he was, right? Because it was another son of Jethro or Reuel. His name was Hobab, I believe. Hobab. And so John said you guys got into a discussion about that. Did you ever decide? Well, let's see. Before I start all that, I should open in prayer. So let me do that, okay? Father God, thank you very much for the evening. Thank you for this group of people that decided it was a good thing to come out and look at your Torah. I'd ask that you'd bless our time this evening, that you would reward us for diligently seeking you, by allowing us to know you better and to get better insight into you and into how you'd like us to behave. And we just love you, God. Thank you. In Yeshua's name, amen. Did anyone ask the question whether or not Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, went with Moses as he went? Because it really isn't clear. Did you decide that he did go or he didn't go? I beg your pardon? Okay, it says in verse 30, I'm in chapter 10, verse 30, Numbers chapter 10, verse 30. He answered, he says, "No, I will not go. I am going to go back to my own land and my own people." So he says, "I'm not going." And then verse 31 says, "But Moses said, 'Please do not leave us. You know where we should camp in the desert, and you can be our eyes. If you come with us, we will share with you whatever good things Yahweh gives us.'" So they set out for the mountain. But it doesn't say that he went, right? The only reason I bring it up is because I found this little thing. Judges. Go to Judges chapter 1. Joshua, Judges. And if you go to Judges chapter 1 and you look in verse 16, this is right at the beginning. Chapter 1:16, it says, "The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms with the men of Judah to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad." Okay, the only thing I make of that is that the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms. That's Jericho. So I don't know. I think that's at least some argument that says he did go. I don't think it matters whether he went or not. I just wanted to throw my 2 cents worth in there. Could be. Well, no, it says the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, not of Moses. Judges chapter 1, verse 16.
Yeah, but that would still be Moses' children.
No, it would say descendants of Moses. It says descendants of Moses' father-in-law.
Oh, maybe they skipped a generation or two.
Well, the descendants of Moses' father-in-law ought to be his in-laws, not his. I think if it was descendants of Moses, it would say descendants of Moses. That's what I was thinking. Anyway, it's not a big deal. I just wanted to...
But they would be descendants of Moses' wife, which would be descendants of
his father-in-law.
The father-in-law, too.
Okay. Technicality. Whatever. Like I say, it really doesn't matter. I just thought it was kind of cool. Yes.
Well, along those lines, John was saying, who is this guy that Moses can offer these promises to? Mm-hmm. So if he did go, then, well, I guess we don't know the answer as far as the Bible. I'm not sure. But did he get those promises that Moses was saying?
It's that specific answer I can't say, but I can make a strong case for there was a whole lot of people that did go that weren't related to Abraham. Okay? There's the rabble, all those Egyptians that after the plagues and everything finally says, I think these guys got it right, and then Pharaoh doesn't. There are a whole bunch of them that went with them. We're going to talk about one of them tonight. Probably there wasn't, Caleb. Caleb he's not Hebrew. What? Or was it Joshua? It's one of the two.
Plus the Midianites and all the nations that were surrounding him, because they came to see what this, they had heard what this God was doing to the God of the Egyptians, and they came to see. And you got to know that some of them, after seeing what had happened, well, this has to be the God. We're going with them.
Yeah. And the reason that's important to me is because I think I can go to all kinds of places in the Bible and show that God greatly values the adoption process. If you want to be adopted in, it doesn't matter whether you can trace your lineage back to Abraham or not. Well, it says in the New Testament, those who believe are thereby sons of Abraham. And there's a place in Isaiah where it says, the people that have chosen to follow me that weren't children of Abraham, actually I value more because they made the decision to do this. To some degree, the Hebrews didn't. I didn't say that all as well as I'd like to, but oh well. Yes.
So Caleb was not a Kenite, but a Kenizzite, is that?
Kenizzite, yeah.
Okay, that's different.
Kenizzite was not an Israelite.
It wasn't a Kenite, dude. That's what we're in.
Fair point.
Okay.
Fair point. But I'm mixing metaphors. If I've done nothing else but make you realize that there's a lot of people in this group that weren't blood related to Abraham. Yeah. Uh-oh, you're going to disagree with me. I can feel it coming on.
No. I now forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, that makes me feel better, actually, so good. I thought I was the only one that ever did that.
Okay, so this doesn't make sense. And the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, I thought they were Midianites.
Well, one doesn't preclude you from being another.
Well, if you're going strictly by your patriarchy, it's got to be one or the other. You're only one thing in the patriarchy.
Well, okay.
I mean, I don't.
Suppose Midian had several kids, and one of them was named Kenite. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying that it's not a strong conclusion that Hobab didn't go. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm not even disagreeing with that conclusion. I'm just trying to figure this out here.
Okay.
Because I kind of thought he's brought up later on. Somebody's mentioned later on, I think. That's either him or his father.
Well, I don't know if you were here just a minute ago. We talked about Judges 1:16.
That's
Is that
where
you
I'm
were
at.
looking? Okay. The thing I was keying into that is that the relative descendants of Moses' father-in-law, descendants of Moses' father-in-law, to me, are people like Hobab.
Right. Well, my whole point last week was he had an influence. I believe he had a huge influence and caused Moses to not think clearly.
That could be
because of his father-in-law,
yeah,
or because of his connection to his in-laws.
Okay. Yep, that's fine. Actually, I just thought we'd get things going good, and I'd really just soon move on to something else. But go ahead.
I like the, instead of adoption, I like the idea of purchased, because God does say,
Fair point.
you were bought, you were purchased, you were bought, and he used the children of the Egyptians to do the purchasing, remember? So
Yep.
life for life, that kind of a thing. So they were bought, they were purchased, and much like we are, Scripture talks about, we were bought
Yeah.
as well by the blood of
Yeah,
Yeshua.
that's a very good point. Okay, now then, we've got that out of the way. I just wanted to throw a big monkey wrench into things. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about before we start? In earnest. You're doing a great job. But John, he tricked you. Yes, I just want you to know that. Okay, I think then we'll call ourselves officially in Numbers chapter 11. Okay? So would someone like to read just the first few verses of Numbers chapter 11? Let's just say the first 3 verses. Does someone want to read the first 3 verses of Numbers chapter 11? Thank you.
Now, when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and when Moses prayed to the Lord, the fire was quenched. So he called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord had burned among them. Now the mixed that was it.
That's good enough. We'll just talk about that for just a minute, and then we'll move on to the more meatier portions. I wanted to use that to talk about, when is this in this whole scheme of things? How long? I mean, where were they just a couple of days ago on their clock? They were still at the foot of Mount Sinai, right? They've been at the foot of Mount Sinai since the end of Exodus. So they just began to move. So this is the first time they've had to pack up the tabernacle and head out. And what's the first thing they do? They complain, right? That's they complain, and it's going to get worse here. And how does God feel about it? I think he shows rather clearly how he feels about that, right? It made him mad, right? So I think it even says that. His anger was aroused, and fire came out and consumed mine says some of the outskirts of the camp. Now, yours implied it was actually people, I think. Yeah, could have been. But they cried out, God was obviously real to these guys. I mean, not only was he this pillar of fire at night, but the pillar of cloud during the day, and they were following the pillar. They were following. So, I don't know, man, you have to be pretty gutsy to complain, if you ask me. Any thoughts about that? So they called the place Taberah, which means burning. Yes.
Well, I think it's pretty easy for people to complain. I think that is inherent in our fleshly nature.
Very true.
Along those lines, though, it's always bothered me that the Lord gets mad because he made us. And when I read, it displeased him, I can understand it as a parent. You take your kid on vacation and you have all these things planned, and they're still going to complain about something. and yeah, it makes me upset because they're not being grateful.
Yep.
But God made us. He should know that we're going to complain.
I think he clearly knows, but I mean, just like about your kids too. I think his tolerance level is actually greater than we give him credit for sometimes. Mark?
So knowing that they complain at the first time of movement, should we expect people to complain whenever the great movement comes, when we are being taken to the place? I'm going to read Revelation 12:14 for you. It says, "But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and a half a time from the presence of the serpent." So there's movement. It's obviously God Almighty that's taking it. So whether we believe that we're part of that group that's going into the wilderness to be nourished for a time, or we're the group that's being taken to Jerusalem, you think people are going to complain?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's another thing that I wanted to bring out here too, and that is that where did these people come from? I mean, they have been the past generations as slaves. Slaves, they get told everything. They get told when you get up in the morning what you're supposed to do all day, and when you go to bed, they don't have any particular freedom or any ability to kind of launch out on their own. They're told everything. So there's an important thing that has to happen between here and the end of the book of Numbers. They have to kind of learn how not to think like slaves, not to wait for someone. I mean, I can't think of a better thing to do as a slave than to complain, right? So I'm just setting the stage for the things that are going to happen during the rest of the book. Yeah.
Do you think that, I can't remember if I've read it or not, is there anything that infers that God did not intend for them to be out there 40 years, that it was due, because we know that he ended up saying, I'm going to wait till these people die off before you go into the land. Do you think that he's like, okay, well, yeah, this will be a 3-year thing. I'll work with these people, but ended up being 40? Because there's always that talk about now, how long do you want to be in the wilderness? Because you get to choose based on how you
respond.
Yes.
That's exactly right. Well, I don't know if you're going with this direction or not, but there's the foreknowledge of God and the predestination thing, and then there's the fact that we get to choose. So it didn't have to be 40 years. I think he probably knew, but he didn't. It didn't have to be. And I've thought about this a lot, and I've done some fun reading about it. The Bible clearly says he knows everything about us before we were even born. But it also clearly says that what we do matters. So somehow or another, we have to live with that seeming contradiction because, so in his foreknowledge, yes, he knew it was going to take 40 years. And I think if you look back on it, you can see that that was necessary in order to get the people of Israel to be who he needed them to be. But on the other hand, I don't think they had to do that. I think they could have. We're going to find out the thing that caused the 40 years here just in a week or so. And they didn't have to do that. So we just have to learn to live with that because that's God's cool. He can do that. He can make things both so he knows them, but yet we get to change them.
The good thing about the bad things is you can read about it and not do them.
Here.
I mean, that's why we're here in a way.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All of these things happen to us so that we would learn. Okay. Mark?
So I know that in the English here, my English, it says the people became like those who complain of adversity. But the Septuagint says the people were muttering wicked things. So the Greek, the Septuagint, the oldest text we have, is saying they were uttering wicked stuff.
Yeah. We'll get that's good. We'll get a better chance to kind of get some of that. Let's read on. Would someone like to read from verse 4 through verse 23? 4 through 23 is a rather longish section. Nobody volunteers, I'll end up doing it. You want to do it? I'll do it if you don't want to. She's making me do it. Okay. Chapter 11, verse 4 through 23.
Okay, this is ESV.
That's okay. It doesn't. We look like lots of different versions.
Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again and said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat, and remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium. The people went about and gathered it and ground it in hand mills or beat it in mortars and boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. When the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell with it. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant, and why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I convince all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give their fathers? Where am I going to get meat to give all the people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once. If I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness. Am I still going?
Okay, keep going to 23, and then we'll come back and dissect all this.
Then the Lord said to Moses, gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting. And let them take their stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there. And I will take some of the spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone. And say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was better for us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat just 1 day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wept before him, saying, why did we come out of Egypt? But Moses said, the people among whom I number I am number 600,000 on foot. And you have said, I will give them meat that they may eat a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them and be enough for them? Or shall all the fish in the sea be gathered up for them and be enough for them? And the Lord said to Moses, is the Lord's hand shortened? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not.
Okay. Like I say, don't you just love it? I mean, it says you're going to have meat to eat, not just 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, a month. You're going to have so much of it, it'll be coming out your nose. There's a lot of humor in this stuff. So who was it that started griping? We'll go back up to verse 4. Who was it that immediately, that first started the griping? Beg your pardon? The rabble, right? The rabble, it says. Now, who are the rabble in general? Yeah, the non-Israelites primarily. They're the ones that came along. They're the ones, the Egyptians, that basically said, I don't know, maybe these guys are right. Maybe we ought to go with them. Maybe they really do know who the real God is. So, yeah, it's the mixed multitudes, as they called them, all right? They started, yours said weeping, mine says wailing. And I just love, if only we had meat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. Now we've lost our appetite and we never eat anything but this stupid manna. Right? I mean, that's what they're saying. Now, if you were God, how would you view that? I mean, they've been on the road less than a week, and here they are complaining about what they're getting to eat.
I like here it makes the distinction between the rabble or the mixed multitude and the children of Israel. And it reads to me like the mixed multitude had no problem complaining and lusting.
Yep.
And the children of Israel didn't have the fortitude to stop this or not participate in it.
Yeah, that's fair.
And, part of my theme last week was the enemy's in the camp. It really isn't outside the camp. It's if we can't govern ourselves, we're the proximate cause of our own injury, to be a legal term.
Yeah, well, and in other words, why didn't some Israelites stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, you don't know God like we do. We just need to trust him. Nobody said that. So the rebels ran the day.
Or go to God in a reasonable way and say,
How about something other
And
than
can
manna
we
today?
have something else? Respectfully, I'm just saying. It's just
Yeah,
an
yeah.
idea out there,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. I agree.
And also, someone would have to call their BS on all this. Oh, in the good old days,
Yes.
when we had all these wonderful things. When you were slaves, you mean? That's the part you're
Back
forgetting.
when you didn't have any freedom whatsoever. Yeah. Of course, now they talked about the fish were at no cost, but so was the manna too, by the way. All right. It says, oh, do you have something? Yeah.
So in my translation, New King James Version, it said the mixed multitude yielded to intense craving, which sounds like the children of, like John was saying, the children of Israel did not yield to that intense craving, but were persuaded eventually to join in. So my first thought was the children of Israel had some level of discipline where they were able to not give in to the intense craving, and we're like, okay, but then eventually,
They didn't have enough discipline to be able to withstand the pressure on the
Yeah.
other side.
yes.
Yeah, well, and I can relate to that. You know what I mean? The guys, the rabble, had bigger mouths, right? They were more prone to being able to gripe and complain about it, and nobody. Yeah, I think we're making a mistake by painting everybody with a big brush, but nonetheless, none of the children of Israel had enough guts to stand up and say, "Hey, shut up, dude."
Okay, and then I wanted to clarify, just make sure I'm on the right page. At this point, before they started moving, they had been in the desert for 2 years and 2 months. In Numbers 10,
Is that what it
was
said? Well, I think it said they left in the second year, didn't it?
When did the Israelites set out from Mount Sinai?
Uh-huh.
And it was 2 years and 2 months. So
Okay.
does that mean they had been in the wilderness 2 years and 2 months?
No. They've been at the foot of Mount Sinai that whole time.
But that's the wilderness.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
I guess, well, my point is that, but the question really is, they've been eating manna for 2 years
Yes.
and 2
Yes.
months.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted
If not that long, certainly at least a year. So
Okay.
long enough to get sick of manna. I'll give you that.
Okay. And then we can get to this later because it's kind of later on, but it stood out to me when Moses said that he couldn't bear it. And then there's the verse that God will not give you more than you can bear. So if Moses is like me at all, he probably, I always think I can't bear it. I'm like, I can't deal with this. But he must have been able to, but then chose not to.
We'll talk about that more because I want to dwell on that a little bit because that's a good point. No, that's fine. I don't mind that at all. As a matter of fact, now's a good time. Sorry, Margaret, go ahead.
I think we can look at ourselves coming out of the wilderness and in our journey out from the Babylonian system, when we're abandoning the Easter, the Christmas, and how we long for the tamales, the menudo, the ham, the eggnog, and it's hard because that Christmas spirit is a very strong spirit. Not only that, it's we're few in number, and there's so many people out there that sometimes it just washes you with them. You know, it just sweeps
It's hard.
you.
Yeah.
It sweeps you into it, and you have to have the fortitude to say, no, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to go it alone if I have to, and be able to stand up to it. I'm glad she brought that up. That they didn't have the fortitude.
Yeah, it's
They didn't have. You don't have fortitude, or you're just carried because you're being carried by whatever
Yeah.
whatever wind is
Well,
blowing.
I agree with what you're saying, and I'm buying into it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I often come to is what he really wants from us is for us to really want him. Right. So by doing this to us, he's basically saying, so do you want me bad enough to go through this? You know, do you value a relationship with me more than you can't stand the manna for another day? You know, and I often think this, a lot of the problem with people that have kind of a superficial relationship with God is they don't understand the importance.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And it's a lot of discipline too. It's like, they've been out there eating the manna for a year and they're alive and well. It seems like,
Yeah. Maybe they need to get creative with the recipes.
Yeah. Bake it, boil it.
Yeah.
Were the rabble also slaves?
No. Well, not generally. I mean, it says mixed multitude, but if we assume that in general they weren't the Hebrews, they weren't, the Israelites, then they probably weren't slaves, but they were also the working class. I doubt that there are any, anybody from Pharaoh's court in that group, although there may have been. We don't know.
Well, the words of, what we had in Egypt, I mean, I always assumed you were all slaves. What are you complaining about now? But are those the words of the slaves when they said, we had this, we had the melons and this and that and the other? Who's speaking? Is it the rabble or is it the Hebrews or is it all of them?
Well, don't know. That's a good question. It could be all of them. It could be all of them. I know one thing that I should have mentioned as you were talking, I thought about the slave drivers. They had Egyptian foremen, so some of those guys might have been in that group, for what it's worth. Marvin.
Jerry, do you know when the first time the term mixed multitude was used?
Yeah, it's back when in the Passover.
In the Passover.
Yeah, in the Passover, it talks about they all got together and left. That the day Pharaoh finally said, "Take your people and go."
That included the slaves also in that mixed multitude.
Well,
he's talking about the whole group, isn't he?
Well, the whole group was a mixed multitude.
Right.
Yes. So the mixed multitude.
So are you changing the definition now?
No, he said rabble.
I understand,
Yeah.
but it said mixed multitude in here, and I thought
Oh,
a minute ago you were
mine-
talking it was the non-Hebrews.
Well, I can't be that specific about it anyway. Mine says rabble, and I assumed that rabble meant non-Hebrews. But what do I know?
Well, no, you would think that because it makes a distinction right there in the verse between the two in the first or second verse, doesn't it? It makes a distinction between the two groups. I think Moses, God. I remember for sure that God said, "Those, something like the sons of Israel and those people that you brought with you, Moses." That's when God said that to Moses.
Yeah.
Like he brought in all these other people.
As my wife says, your son. Look what your son did.
All right. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk about the food. I think Monty Judah brought this up.
Okay.
Well, I heard about this a long time ago. These guys didn't have nothing. They had sheep and they had goats and they had all kinds of things.
Sure.
Is it just that, well, I want it for free. I get manna for free, but I want something else for free, and I don't want to spend I don't want to slaughter my own goats or sheeps for a different type of food.
Well, I think there's something to that. I think they're probably at the root of it a lot is just they're tired of manna, really.
Slaughter a goat.
Well, they certainly could.
Well, that's my point. They don't want to do that because then that's the sacrifice that they have to put up.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
So the Greek word for rabble does mean mixed. It
Okay.
says it's mixed. So it's just like it talks about in the other places. It's the mixed people that came out with the Hebrews.
Yeah. So, and again, we don't do quite right when we paint one whole group with one brush anyway. So I'm sure there were some Hebrews that were right along in there saying, I'm sick of manna too. Okay, let's move on. They have verses 7, 8, and 9 are a little thing about manna. I wanted to go to verse 10. It says, Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance to his tent. And Yahweh became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. And he asked Yahweh, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to give to their forefathers? Where can I get the meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden's too heavy. If this is how you're going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I've found favor in your eyes, do not let me face my own ruin. Now, if I said that, or if anybody said anything like that, what would you think their condition would be? This what?
Despair.
Despair. In the working world, we call that burnout. I mean, I think Moses is basically kind of having a crisis here. He says, good gosh, this is too much. I can't take care of all these babies, you know? And he's taking, I think, more on himself probably than God necessarily intends him to do. But I think it's interesting to note how God responds, because that's kind of a relatively rebellious kind of an attitude to have, you know, really, for Moses. But God doesn't come down on him, does he? I mean, what's he do? He says, bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come before the tent of meeting that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take of the spirit that's on you and put the spirit on them, and they will help you carry the burden of the people. In other words, God says, okay, you really don't have to do this all by yourself, and I'll show you how. I'll give you some help. So I just think that's an important point here, because, Moses goes back and forth. Moses is a real guy. And, sometimes he's confident and he knows what he's doing, and other times he's saying, man, alive, I can't do this. This is way too much. I mean, he complains about, there's not enough fish in the sea to feed all these people. What do you think about that? Do you have any comments about that? I figured John might.
I'm experiencing a little deja vu all over again. Didn't we play this verse before? Like in Exodus or something, where he puts the spirit on Caleb, and Caleb complains about some of the ones weren't.
No, that's this coming up.
Oh, we're out there yet?
That's this coming right up.
Oh, well, then it was deja vu from 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's deja vu from the last time you were through this. Yeah. Okay.
The other thought I had was, I guess I don't want to complain too much to Moses, because I'm not in his shoes, and I who knows how I would have responded. So I'm not going to give him that. And you're right, he doesn't come down on him. It would be cool if he could do it in a less melodramatic way and say, let's do this. Well, how do I fix this problem?
Yeah.
In a more rational way.
Yeah.
And isn't this Jethro's advice anyway?
Well, yeah.
Or is that more Jethro more dealing with the legal issue? But it's kind of the same thing.
Well,
here,
no, I think if I could paraphrase what God's really going to say to Moses, he's going to say, you don't have to do this all by yourself. You really know how to delegate. You just forgot it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's kind of true. And back to the other thing you were saying, didn't we do this before? Moses had a very nice interchange with God at the golden calf thing. Just when he was still up on the hill, and God said, go down and see the people because they've already, become adulterous. And he said, Moses, you stand over here and I'll wipe these people out and we'll start over again with you. And Moses goes through this argument about why that's not a good idea. So that may be what you were thinking about, but the spirit thing is coming up here, and I think I got carried away there, sorry. Yes?
I just saw something in here I wanted to ask about. Before I ask, though, I want to say that I am always very, very leery to make fun of the people in the wilderness, because it's so easy to say, how could they have acted that way?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Didn't they know, this, and they had that, and they had this? And it's very similar to when Jesus was here and he did all the miracles and nobody believed him either. Yeah. They were idiots, but then you think back and you're like, okay, well, I when you take that onto yourself and say, what can I learn from this? There's so many times I complain and I don't trust.
Yeah.
So I have to be very careful.
Yeah.
So my question though was, when Moses said, where am I to get meat to give all these people? For they weep all over me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. Now, Moses sat with God.
Mm-hmm.
God gave him the ability, he has a spirit upon him where he can kind of do things that other people, like turning a stick into a
Yep.
snake and
Yep.
water to blood. How come Moses didn't yell back and be like, go pray or
Yeah.
give instruction?
Why didn't he take control of the situation?
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
think it was because of the burnout or?
That's
It's
my
weird.
opinion.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I remember another situation which is similar to that was when Elijah was going up against the prophets of Baal, and he was just really mouthing off to him, doing this kind of stuff, and yet within 24 hours he was running for his life because he knew Jezebel was after him. So I think the thing that's comforting to me is to realize the Bible paints a real, authentic picture of what people are like. And heck, one day I can wake up and have a lot of faith, and the next day I can wake up and not. And I'm here to tell you, it's always a little bit of struggle, I guess I like to think I'm growing, but sometimes I wonder. Anybody? John?
I'm going to redeem myself a little bit. Exodus 24:9.
Uh-huh.
Then went up Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel. That must have been what I was thinking. That it was
Okay. Yes.
something like that.
Yeah, okay. Those 70 elders had been around. You're right. Yep. All right, then, of course, I really like the promise where he says, okay, fine, you want meat? I'll give you meat, and I'll give you meat till it comes out your nose. And he says that pretty much point blank. And then Moses continues to complain. He says, there's 600,000 guys here. I can't, Moses says. I can't give them enough meat. And God, he says it pretty simple. He says in verse 23, Yahweh answered Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? You will now see whether or not what I say will come true for you. Yes.
Doesn't this remind you a lot? I mean, different subject, but same scenario where Moses is whining at God. He did it at the burning bush too. I don't want to do that. I can't do this.
Oh, yeah. Like I say, Moses is a very good character to really study because he's just as human as you can get, Yeah.
So you said he's telling God, there's 600,000 people here. Or
Men.
yeah, men. There's 3 million people. How am I supposed to feed them? They were thinking the same thing when they were trying to feed the 2,000 with Yeshua. So if they're going to doubt trying to feed 2,000, can you imagine 3 million people trying to figure out how you're going to feed them? Like I said, when you're looking at just 50,000 people, it seems like an unbelievable task. It's just really crazy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good.
So the thing that just keeps running through my mind is just the idea that Moses is it's a contrast of our Savior. Moses is saying, how am I gonna feed all these people? And Yeshua says, I am the bread of life.
Yeah.
And and I can't think of the scripture, but there is one that says that there's going to come one after Moses who, speaking of Messiah.
It's in Deuteronomy, and we'll get there, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so this it sort of does this contrast between the two characters, whereas one was weak and the other is strong, and one was not perfect and the other was.
Well, that's good. I think that's very good. I bet you, that sounds like a fun invitation to sit there and think about these two side by side, because I'm sure there's a lot of really interesting contrasts like that.
I actually want to go off that as well, because that makes me think, because I go to a few different services and stuff and like try to learn like every day of the week if I can. And I heard this story before, and also when she mentioned Yeshua standing on the mountain, like feeding the people, and then he was like, "I am the bread of life," and they're like, "Well, where's the bread?" And he's like, "No, I'm the bread," and the people are just so, like she said, stupid, and they really just don't get it. And we see it back there, we see it now, we see it when Yeshua came, and it's just really funny. Like for this example, you can understand like why they're irritated. They've been eating manna for like 2 years.
Yeah.
They're sick of it. They describe what it tastes like. It's just like oily cake.
Well,
So it's not even
I
that.
think it might be pretty good, but
It
go
might be
ahead.
pretty good, but you get sick of it for 2 years straight.
Yeah.
So
You
you can
get tired of
understand where they're
anything.
coming from. But
Yeah.
Moses, he's in charge of all these people. He's so stressed out, and God's like, "Come on, man! You really think my arm's too short? I am God.
Yeah.
I can do it."
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, he still doesn't believe him, and it's just crazy."
That's good, because like you were talking about we sometimes condemn these guys for. I've done this. Say, well, look at what they've just seen. Look at what they've just been through. How can they be this way?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Moses, he went through it too.
Yeah. And we're not any better. We do it all the time.
Yeah.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, we do. So anyway, Mark's got something.
I also got to confess that having 8 children, if my kids were eating the same thing for just 5 days, the comments would wear on you. I mean, it does.
Yeah.
Those things, no matter how you're disciplining or how you're correcting your kids, it can wear on you. And then as that stuff wears on mom, now it's the kids and mom letting dad have it, and dad's being worn down. So everybody's being worn down by this constant saying, what are we having for breakfast? What are we having for lunch? Well, you know what we're having for lunch.
Yeah.
Same thing we had yesterday. And so I could see how the kid element could kick this into a whole nother gear of frustration.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, now I remember. I wonder if it seems to me like God could have said, "Why did you wait so long to ask for help?"
Mm-hmm.
That's listening and reading that story. It seems to me if Moses would have asked for help a lot sooner, he would have got it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes I think about that because I know God wants us to participate with His stuff. I mean, it's the other side of the coin is just sit around and wait for Him to do it. So you make a good point, though. He could have asked sooner.
Yeah, I was going to echo that point, but he's got a weird me problem in that I have to solve all the problems. It's on me.
Yeah.
And he just went through a lesson about delegating to 70 elders.
Yeah.
Why do you delegate to God as well?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Well, God, why don't you got to have some diplomacy. How, God, are we going to... this is going to be amazing, God, to see you pull this off.
Yeah.
I want to be there when this happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
He's got to be.
Yeah.
He's got to be
stand
creative.
back a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, with his words.
I can identify with Moses, so I'd feel the same way. I'd feel, my gosh, how can you expect me to take care of all of this? This is way too big. Yeah. Okay, so God tells Moses, He says,
Just one extra
Sure.
thing. We have to also remember that they're not having to work for this. So however long they're eating manna, they're not having to go out and labor in fields, pick,
they're not making bricks.
They're not having to do the labor that it takes to work to make the land provide.
That's a good
So that's
point.
another element in it.
Yep.
Mark, that's an interesting comment. What are they doing?
Well, they're
when they're not moving, what are they doing?
griping, murmuring, murmuring and complaining. Beg pardon? They go out and pick the manna every day, and then, yeah.
I like your comment because I was thinking about that. I'm like, okay, so what are they doing all day? And I thought about myself, and if I'm not focused, I get, well,
You start thinking about yourself.
I actually, yes, you're right. I go into myself and I start thinking about how I feel. Whereas if I'm focused outward, doing something, and that's why if you think about it, during that time, those 2 years, they were building that tabernacle, and that took time, and they had focus, and they had something to do, and you have to wonder if it's because they don't actually have something to do, if it allows them to go inward instead of outward.
Well, that's, you bring up a thought. I don't know how you are. I always kind of struggle with the stress of moving. And so they're moving. This is the first time they've moved in a while, too. And, so anyway, let's go on. Verse 16, God says to Moses, bring 70 of Israel's elders who are known as good leaders and have them come meet with me, and I'll help you. They'll help you carry the burden so you won't have to carry it alone. Then verse 18 says, tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. And then he goes on to talk about you'll eat it till it comes out your nose. Verse 21 says, but Moses said, how am I going to feed these 600,000 men and all the people that go along with them? And God says, is my arm too short? So anyway, let's go on and finish the chapter. Would somebody like to read from verse 24 to the end of chapter 11? Okay.
Numbers 24, 11:24.
11:24 to the end.
And
yeah.
Moses went out and told the people the words of Yahweh, and gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people, and set them round about the meeting tent. And Yahweh came down in a cloud and spake unto them, and took of the spirit that was upon him, and gave it unto the 70 elders. And it came to pass that when the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied and did not cease. But there remained 2 of the men in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them, and they were of them that were written, but went not out unto the meeting tent. And they prophesied in the camp. And there ran a young man and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Moshe, one of his young men, answered and said, My sire, Moses forbid them. And Moses said unto him, enviest thou for my sake? Would Elohim that all Yahweh's people were prophets, and that Yahweh would put his spirit upon them? And Moses retired back into the camp, and he and the elders of Israel. And there went forth a wind from Yahweh, and brought quails from the sea, and let them fly by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and about a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and about 2 cubits high above the face of the earth. And the people stood up all that day, and all that night, and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. He that gathered the least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of Yahweh was kindled against the people, and Yahweh smote the people with a very great plague. And he called the name of the place Kirbroth Hatava, because there they buried the people that lusted. And the people journeyed from Kibroth Hatava unto Zeroth, and abode in Haseroth.
Okay. So, who can describe what happened here? I remember the first time I read this, well, I thought that was Acts chapter 2. I didn't think anything happened like that in the Old Testament. But boy, that's pretty plain, isn't it? God took of his spirit and he put it on the 70 elders and they prophesied. I've got to tell you, just in true confessions, to this day, I'm not real sure what that must have looked like. But they did, and not only that, but it makes this special point of Eldad and Medad that they didn't even go down there. and God's Spirit rested on them, and they prophesied too. So it must have been a pretty incredible looking thing. I'm interested in any thoughts you guys might have about that. Again, what I found out, mentioning this Acts chapter 2 thing, is there's really nothing in the New Testament that you can't find in the Old.
I have a question, and I have a comment. Would the two that remained in the camp be like a type of the two witnesses?
Oh, they could be. It could be.
But it says here that they were written or accounted of in the 70s, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like they were not included in the 70s.
No, I think they were being rebellious is what they were doing. They should have been down there where they were told to be, and they didn't go. That's my
Yeah.
opinion. And I may be reading more into it than's really there.
So I see something in the Septuagint here that I had never seen before. So what do we see that the Almighty is going to do to them after they eat this quail?
They get sick of it, right?
Since they get sick, a plague, says
Yeah.
it brings a plague on them. But what's interesting is, by the way, two cubits is 3 feet.
Yeah.
So you're talking 3 feet, day's journey every direction.
Yeah. That's a ton of quail. It's
Yeah.
bound to go
You're
bad.
walking on it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you're literally walking on top of the quail that's dead. And I mean, you got to gather a lot of it up because it's going to start stinking, being dead, for very long. But up in verse, I think we have a little insight to what happens to them in this plague. Verse 20, it says, "Up to a month of days you shall eat it until it comes out of your nostrils." And I'm reading the Greek.
Uh-huh.
"And it shall become cholera to you."
Cholera.
The
I'll
disease cholera.
I'll be.
Yeah.
I'll be. Well, I had made note that the plague could very well have been caused from eating rotten food. Yeah, right? It wasn't rotten when it came, but it was rotten by the end of the month. Okay. Anything else? Well, let's go on. Chapter 12 is one of my favorite verses here, my favorite passages. So I'm going to read chapter 12, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. So starting with chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. "Has Yahweh spoken only through Moses?" they asked. "Hasn't he also spoken through us?" And Yahweh heard this. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. At once, Yahweh said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, "Come out of the tent of meeting, all three of you." So all three of them came out. And then Yahweh came down in a pillar of cloud, and he stood at the entrance to the tent, and he summoned Aaron and Miriam. When both of them stepped forward, he said, "Listen to my words. When a prophet of Yahweh is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions, I speak to him in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak clearly face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of Yahweh. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" The anger of Yahweh burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, there stood Miriam, leprous like snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had leprosy, and he said to Moses, "Please, my Lord, do not hold against us the sin that we so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away." So Moses cried out to Yahweh, "O God, please heal her." Yahweh replied to Moses, "If her father has spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on till she was brought back. After that, the people left Hazeroth and encamped in the desert of Paran. I think there's a lot to be learned from this passage. Let's go back to the beginning. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife. Now, there's a debate here. Do you remember who Moses' wife, what her name was? Zipporah. Zipporah was the daughter of Yitro or Reuel, depending on which. Some think that Yitro was his name and Reuel might be a title or something. But anyway, that was the woman that he met at the well when he fled from Egypt back as a young man. Anyway, some people think that she was a Cushite. Some people think that she had disappeared, gone, died, or whatever, and that he had remarried. I don't think there's much support for that. But anyway, evidently Miriam and Aaron decided to take offense, if you will, that he married a Cushite as opposed to, let's say, an Israelite. And so they began to puff themselves up, right? They got prideful. They said in verse 2, has God only spoken through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Now, they were just sitting there among themselves, I guess, saying this kind of stuff. I mean, you can imagine it's also laced with a little about, disparaging remarks about Moses' wife, whatever. And God heard it, right? God heard it. And one of my favorite phrases is where in verse 4, he says, at once Yahweh said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out of the tent of meeting. So he didn't sit on this very long. And then he got them out, and he said, all three of them came out. Then he came down in a pillar of cloud, and he stood at the entrance to the tent, and he summoned Aaron and Miriam. And he says, okay, Moses, you stay over there. I want to talk to these two here. And he kind of just, in my opinion, it's kind of like he grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, and he set him down in front of him. And this is what he said. He says, Moses is not like anybody else on earth. I go in and I sit down and we talk face to face. Everybody else that I deal with on earth, I deal with them in visions and dreams, but not Moses. Moses is different. Moses is special. Why were you afraid to talk bad about Moses? Why on earth would you do this? And then he leaves. I mean, what do you think about that? To me, it's just a really important point. John's got something to think about that.
So it's hard for me to believe that Miriam just out of the blue decided to be rebellious. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
Yep.
there's got to be something there.
Yep.
And I think what's there is, remember, Zipporah, if it is Zipporah, remember, she was rebellious about not having the circumcision.
Yep. She didn't want to circumcise her second son.
Right.
Yeah.
In ways, she kind of badmouths God by saying, you and, this, I forget what she said. But
a bridegroom of blood to me.
Right. So I think they were upset about that. I think that it's, I'm yielding to conspiracy theories here a little bit, but Hobab, I think, part of my thinking is the Midianites see all these people here and they go, these guys are intimidated just by the numbers. I mean, they're way more than we are.
Uh-huh.
And they have an impressive God. They can't deny that. So how do we fight them? We can't fight them head on. It's better to work inside the camp and stir up trouble and fight from within.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying is there possible an influence of the Midianites, or maybe they're Kenites, I don't know. Whoever they are, that are allowing this to happen. And she's an in-law. And Moses he's blinded by these people because they're his in-laws.
Yeah.
And they're doing things. Now, what she did here is not right. That's just rebellion. But there's got to be some reason why she's doing these things.
Yep. I think that's a good idea. If nothing else, it's obviously something the adversary would surely want to do, right? So, yeah, that's a fair point. one of the things that I don't really get, and I don't know whether I want to go very far with this, is that it's funny that this attitude should show up right after the Spirit of God was distributed to the 70 elders. I don't know exactly what that has to do with anything, but it is pride and arrogance on the part of Miriam and Aaron, right? They're basically rising up with a proud spirit, and they're acting like, I don't know who made you so special, Moses. We're every bit as good as you are. Heck, as a matter of fact, you're the little brother, right? They're both older than him, right? Mark's got something.
Every time there's a moving of the Spirit, there's a spirit that rises up to want to squash that. And so it happens in Acts chapter 2. It happens in other areas where God's Spirit is moving upon people. So here's the pouring out of Spirit upon the 70 elders, and people get jealous about those things. Hey, why am I not part of that? There's all kinds of things that happen. But she gets put out of the camp for how many days?
7.
Why?
Well, we were getting there, but that's the way you treat a leper. You take a leper, the priest pronounces her, that's leprosy. I can see that's leprosy. She goes outside the camp. And at the end of 7 days, she comes back. And if she's cured, she can stay. If not, she goes back.
So why leprosy?
Well, we're getting there. The sages, if you will, historically, leprosy is thought of in the Old Testament, especially, as the most common penalty, if you will, or judgment for what they call lashon hara. Lashon hara is Hebrew. Hara is the evil, and lashon is the tongue. And so it's the evil tongue. Lashon hara is something you a lot of times hear in Hebraic circles, and it's basically murmuring and backbiting, rumors, causing malicious slander, things like that. Usually under the table, usually whispered, but it's meant to tear down, to cause destruction, to cause division and dissension. Yeah. And so that's why in this story, whenever God leaves and Aaron looks up and sees Miriam, she's leprous, and evidently she was quite leprous, because he compares her to a stillborn infant coming from his mother's womb with his flesh half eaten away. So she must have been quite a sight. But this is the primary focus for the tradition, if you will, that God punishes lashon hara, punishes malicious gossip, backbiting with leprosy. Did you have something else, Mark? Okay.
So I'm digging a little deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Why is leprosy? Why is it required for this case to be set outside 7 days?
I thought the first time it was always 7 days, but maybe you know something I don't know.
Well, leprosy is always associated with any time, like when someone touched a dead person,
Mm-hmm.
they had to be separated for a period of time.
Yep.
So because she has leprosy is death on the skin has died. So because there's death associated on the flesh, that person has to be separated for 7 days.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Those are laws in Leviticus, right? Yep. Leviticus got a whole chapter on how to deal with leprosy. The big question, if you ask me, why didn't Aaron get it? I mean, they were both doing this, so how come Miriam got leprosy and Aaron didn't? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Oh, no, you guys know the answer. You can't answer, Mark.
Because he was the high priest for the tabernacle duties.
That's the best reason, is as the high priest, if he had leprosy, he couldn't do his job. So there would be nobody to carry out the function of the high priest to be the mediator between God and the people and God. So, yeah. That's the most commonly held reason for that. could also be that Aaron may not have been as guilty and that Miriam may have started it. On the other hand, Aaron quite freely admits that, let's see, in verse, I guess it's verse 11, he says to Moses, "Please, my Lord, do not hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed." So he's certainly bearing his share of responsibility. But I think it's primarily that it would put the priesthood into a panic. Any other thoughts? Well, yeah, she leading with the Jezebel spirit could be. I mean, we don't know what was actually going on there. Let's see. Miriam and Aaron, I'm back in the beginning of chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife. And verse 2 says, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?" They asked. So it doesn't really say which one said that. But anyway, the other thing that I think is important to me, or to me it was really important, was the way God dealt with this. I mean, it wasn't like, a lot of times God lets, let's see, this is a little creative license with me, but a lot of times he lets the events transpire that the sin will naturally cause, because he figures, God doesn't have to intervene if he doesn't want to. And he probably could have just let this go, and it would have caused all kinds of problems. But man, I think it's noteworthy that he just immediately picks him up and sets him down and says, "Listen, we have to talk." Excuse me.
I mean, we talked about this before, that Aaron gets out of a lot of things because the thinking is because he's the priest, but he has two sons that are in training now. I mean, that's another possibility that they could have done that function, I would think.
That's true.
So I guess what I'm thinking is, I think it could also just be that Aaron's kind of weak, like almost like a Reuben kind of a character.
Yeah.
Back, because was how much at fault was he with the golden calf incident? I don't know if he was participating in it, but he wasn't strong enough to stop it from happening.
Yeah.
And Miriam may have been, she got by far the punishment.
Yeah.
She was sort of, you know, and it's the same problem with Jacob too.
Yep.
It's like his mother gives him the worst advice you could possibly have, and he doesn't even argue about it.
He just doesn't.
He just, okay, that seems reasonable. I don't know.
That's a good point. I've often, you're right, it certainly fits in with Aaron's character from what we've been able to learn about it. He is, he's not the strongest guy you've ever met. Yeah.
So I'm getting a little upset here as a woman because I'm thinking of Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And, Eve is the one that listened to the serpent, and it's not clear to me whether they were both there or not at the time, but, then God shows up and he's like, "She made me eat it."
That's what Adam says, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I keep seeing a theme of weak men who there's these apparently stronger women, and I think about what you said. Why wasn't Aaron, afflicted also?
Yeah.
And I don't like your answer because God's judgment should be pure. It shouldn't be about, he's got to do this. No, if he sinned, he should have been afflicted. Adam and Eve, Eve got her affliction and Adam ended up getting his affliction also. But in this case, it seems like Aaron got off scot-free.
It does seem that way, yeah.
And sort of, there's something with Abraham. Oh, Abraham. Sarah says, "Yeah, go sleep with that woman." And he does. And then So I don't know. I mean, are you guys seeing this? I'm like,
Well-
so part of me is like, okay, am I a wicked, part of something that I have to be really careful of that? I'm trying to
No,
figure
I understand.
out.
No, I
okay.
understand. There's a couple of things I'll respond to, and you can take them for what they're worth. One is the culture that existed when this was written. Women were just slightly better than slaves. They weren't treated well at all. In today's world, it would be horrible to treat women the way they were treated here. Well, it was because of man. I mean, in some sense, it was ordained by God because all things were, but it wasn't. I don't think that was God's idea. As a matter of fact, if you careful about it and you look at the laws that God has prescribed that deal with women, although they may seem kind of one-sided and certainly not very fair, they were a whole lot better than the laws of the neighboring cultures that they lived in. Now, that doesn't make them right, but it just makes them. It makes it a little better, a little more understandable. The other thing is we talked earlier about He doesn't give you more than you can bear. I mean, women have a lot of talents that men don't, and you don't hear about them much because men are so darn mouthy. But so I guess God knows what He's doing. So I don't have a good excuse other than that.
So, yeah, I think your observation is we're coming from a dysfunctional family.
That's fair.
Right.
That's fair.
And it really wasn't a criticism of women. I mean, like with Jacob, her mother gave him bad advice. Okay, that's bad. But what's worse is to take the bad advice. The problem is weak men. And
Yes.
Adam is probably the worst.
Yeah, Adam's the worst one, right? Yeah, because
You know,
he should have said, no, don't eat it. Right?
And everybody thinks he was not there, but it doesn't say that. He was right there watching the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then he goes and blames God for bringing the woman to him.
Yeah. Yep.
In Aaron's case too, it wasn't just a pass on him being high priest, because he's also the one that was repented about it and brought it, to not let the sin be on them. And if you are, to repent and truly repent with that heart, then forgiveness is there. And he was the one that put that out there. So.
Yeah.
I would add, I've done this before with when you said women were just slightly better than slaves. I would say that I see that women were a lot stronger, and I look at some of the Proverbs 31 woman and other cases that shows that the woman was very, very strong, very
Yes.
capable. I mean, she was the Ruth or the Proverbs 31 woman. She was out buying stuff. She was
Sure.
So I think that there were women that were slaves, but that covenant wife, I don't think she was.
No. As a matter of fact, yeah, I agree with you. I think men in general during these times in these societies didn't treat women very well, but God always did. And I think He expects us to. It's just, John says, a bunch of weak-willed guys running around.
Okay, I want to try to speak. But I disagree. I think that the man was punished. I think it's easier if you picture them being in love and they really love each other, and you're watching your wife be treated that way and that she's cast out, I think it would be much easier to have the punishment done to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the greater punishment would be watching your loved one
No,
suffer.
that's a fair point.
So
Yep, that's fair. Well, one of the things that does occur to me, Mark has talked about the covenant wife, and if you look at all these characters, even though Jacob's a great example, poor old Jacob, he really only had one wife, and her name was Rachel. Now he had these other three that kind of got foisted on him one way or the other. And I feel so bad. You talk about dysfunctional family, you know, all of them wanted Jacob to love them, and he only loved Rachel, right? And all of them were having kids like crazy, especially Leah, but Rachel couldn't have kids for the longest time, you know. So it must have been a pretty bad atmosphere around that family a lot. And then all the boys knew who their mother was, right? So they all knew where they stood in the pecking order. So it was a pretty big mess. And I mean, from my perspective, the adversary was in there just using that every way he could. And the miracle of all of this is God says, that's okay, do your best, basically. And look where we are here, 3,500 years later, and we're talking about it, you know? That's pretty amazing.
That kind of brings to mind, last week we said we were going to check about the Midianites.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like some of the commentaries that I looked at, it said that the Midianites were descendants of one of the sons of Keturah.
Yes.
Who may have been Hagar.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But anyway, he was a descendant of Keturah and Abraham.
Yes.
So he was still a descendant of Abraham.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, as a matter of fact, that's one of the things I have to think about a lot, because this was a polytheistic culture, and they had lots of different gods, you know. And if they were a descendant of Abraham, they definitely knew about our God. But they may have known about him as, my grandfather knew something about him, but we got all these others over here. Look at this newest one the Egyptians have come up with, or whatever, you know. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then the other point I was going to make is here. I remember helping in the school with the kids misbehaving, and a lot of times the teacher was not facing, and I was in the back helping. And you could see the kid that started the trouble. It was like he was the one that started the trouble, but yet it was the other kid that got in trouble that reacted to whatever the first kid did.
Yeah.
And so it was like, and then that kid would get punished. And so a lot of times I think, you know, sometimes, you know, it just happens. You get
It's the wrong place at the wrong time.
Just being there, being there, you know, and reacting to something.
Yeah.
And maybe this is what it was. I don't know. Sometimes people say, "Oh, women are just, you know, gossiping this and that." Well, I've been around men, and they sure are gossiping.
Yeah.
It gets just as bad.
I agree with that. Well, there's like I say, I don't know why I dwell on that chapter 12 a lot, but I really do like the way God treated the situation, and it makes me realize that when God wants to, He can do whatever He needs to do. You know, He can make things happen the way He wants to. The thing that makes God so magnificent or so worthy of worship is that He chooses to let us involve ourselves in all of this. You know, we get to do what we want to do, really, you know, what we want to do, and then He makes it turn out right from His perspective, not necessarily from ours. So it's a pretty amazing thing. It's too late to go into next time. We're going to start on chapter 13, though. Is there anything you want to talk about before we call it a night? Yes.
I just want to say I really appreciate you pointing out multiple times how God dealt with this, because I really think it's an example of how we should deal with things, meaning not letting them fester, not letting them carry on, but just factually addressing it as soon as you can.
Yeah. Boy, I'm guilty of not doing that. Go ahead.
But I just think it's a good model for how we handle things.
Yeah. Yeah, God didn't really get, you know, it says God gets angry, but He never even really said anything here other than, you know, you see this, you know, how could you do this? Okay, I'll close in prayer. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for the book of Numbers. Obviously, thank you for all of your word. Help us to think on these things as we go through our week. Help us to just think of you often and to realize that you're watching us and that you're working with us as we try to become more of who you want us to be. I just thank you, God, that you're patient with us. Help us to do those things that you have laid out for us to do this week and to and keep us safe until we meet together next week. In Yeshua's name, amen. Thanks very much, and we'll see you guys next week.